It's really nice, really nice. Okay, so what we were talking about before we broke for Shabbos was this issue of borrowing someone's religious article without their permission. Can I borrow your talis or your tefillin? So the initial psak in the Shulchan Aruch is that it's perfectly fine. However, there have been more recent poskim who have suggested that people are a little bit more finicky about other people using their personal effects, sweat, neatness and stuff like that. So that's why he had said that whenever possible, you should, if you can find someone that you can borrow tefillin from without asking them, it's better because it becomes questionable halachically whether that's really okay. So he writes this in this paragraph. He says, "Ve'al masha kasavnu imefshel lekabel reshut bekalut mibalatalis," that we wrote that if it's at all possible to get permission from the owner of the talis, v'kol shekain im yodea shehu makpid, and certainly if you know that the guy doesn't want other people using his stuff, then you're not allowed to take it without permission. There have been those who have suggested that you should be machmir and not take someone else's talis without their knowledge. He says, because there are a number of people who would not be happy, either because they don't want other people's perspiring in their talis, or because they don't, it's brand new, the talis, they're particular about who's going to be using it, how it's going to be folded and stuff like that. And he quotes some sources for this. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to skip a little bit. And then he talks about using books without permission. Now, we had mentioned that it used to be that the poskim were more machmir about borrowing books than about borrowing talis and tefillin. And it seems like the tables have turned, just the opposite, because svarim are much more readily available. And talis and tefillin, people are particular about, other people coming in contact with their personal effects. So he says, "V'hinei le'inyan shimush b'sfarm b'li yedias haba'olim," as far as using someone else's sefer without their knowledge, Kosav HaMishnah Berurah uVekaf HaChaim Sham B'Shem HaPrima Gadim, that ve'ha'olam noagim kishemotziin siddur tefillah o machzor b'veis HaKnesses shelo kchinoso kedei lihispalel bo ve'ein heter lazeh demashna siddur misfar. The Mishnah Berurah writes that, he comes down hard on people who borrow other people's svarim. He says, sometimes you'll walk into the base medrash, and it's in the shtibel. It wasn't like they have it today, where there's a whole bunch of svarim that belong to the shul. People used to leave their sidurim there, and you have to come with your own siddur. And let's say you brought a guest, and the guest didn't have a siddur, so you'd find someone else's siddur. And the Mishnah Berurah says, I don't think this is okay. I think this is a form of gezela, because why is it any different from any other sefer? Ulam b'mekor chayim kasav shedavka b'sefer she'en kevel ulomdo. He says that it would be okay. He says he said it's only a problem to borrow a sefer that there's no fixed time as far as how much you're going to use it. Or that you have to pour over it with a lot of concentration. That's where the poskim felt that you might get so engrossed in the study of the sefer, you might come to damage it. Avol siddur tefillah mutter ken kasov b'shar Ephraim b'simin beis. But a siddur you are allowed to take because it's got a finite amount of time. You're not going to abuse it through your loss of focus on it. The only thing is that if the siddur in any way tears or gets damaged while you're borrowing it, you'd have to cover the cost. And even the Aruch HaShulchan writes that a siddur or a machzer is something that the vast majority of people don't care about, and therefore it's totally fine to borrow someone else's siddur or machzer. Od Kosav b'Choshen Mishpat b'Simen Ayin Beisif Aleph Bisman Hazeh Kevin Shasfarm Nitvasim u'Mitzuyim Harbe Ein Adam Makbid Sheishtamshu Bisvarav. So it says that nowadays, and this is even I guess in the times of the Shulchan Aruch, that when Svarim are so easily accessed through the printing press, people don't mind that you borrow their Svarim. The Chen Kosav b'Knesses Hagdola Simin Reish Samich Zayin Sivkatan Chaf Beis b'Shem Radbaz Deha'idna Machlu Ha'olam Al Zeh V'nicha Lahem D'Liyavid Mitzvah B'Mamonam. He says people are generally moichel with Svarim, and they're happy that people are using their Svarim to be able to learn Torah. We don't know of anyone who's so makbid. V'ayin b'sefer beis baruch chlal yud aleph sof oskuf samet zayin kosav she'en lismoch al divrei ha'aruch hashulchan yu'uyin sham. He says we don't recommend that you rely on this heter, is what one sefer says. V'ayin b'shut minchas yitzchak chelik zayin b'simin kof lamish kosav sham shemut lilmo b'sifro shel acher shehunach b'veis hakneses shal das kein hinicho haba'olim sham. He writes the Minchas Yitzchak that it's totally fine to learn someone else from someone else's sefer if they left it in the shul, because that was the reason why they left it there, is that because they don't mind if otherwise you keep it under lock and key. V'chol ze yatzalo al pi bir hagra yoredeya, etc., etc. V'chein kasav hakaf hachayim shaminiach sidur beveis hakneses mistama ino makbid kevin shaderech lekach l'shlamish bo. And therefore, the consensus of the poskim is that it's okay to use someone else's siddur or other sefer if he leaves it in a public place like the shul. The only thing you're not allowed to do is take it out of that place and bring it home or do some or bring it to some other place. Okay, so that sort of puts that to rest. Bottom line is that if you find, let's say you go to your pew and you pull out a siddur or a chumash, and it turns out that it belongs to somebody else, you don't have to think twice. It's perfectly fine, because the assumption is the fact that the guy left it there means that he doesn't mind if people use it. I mean, if he goes over to you, like he came late to davening, and he comes over to you and he says, do you mind if I use my siddur? Then obviously you have to surrender it to him. But otherwise, you can use it without feeling guilty at all. And that's generally the way we comport ourselves. Okay, the next shaila in the laws of Gezel is she'ela misha asa ischute hatzitzis mitzemer gazul v'hu haderech misha'ar minim. He says, if you made your tzitzis out of stolen wool or any other material, we generally make our tzitzis out of wool. What if the wool was stolen? Are the strings kosher or not? Okay. So the tshuva is Misha says chute atzitzis Mishamer gazul v'hu adin mishar minim gezulim chutim elu psulim letzitzis sharei nemar b'pasuk ve'asu lahem tzitzis. So the strings are puzzle, and it's based on the pasuk that says they shall make for themselves tzitzis. The darshu chachamim zal mishalahem v'lo migazul. It's v'asu lahem. It has to belong to you, and it can't be stolen property. B'chol ze l'das moran shulchan aruch avol l'das harama davka k'shegadol zal hachutim dahainu la'achar shenitvu avol im gazar tzemer golmi. He says, but the Ramah says no. It depends. If the strings were stolen, then you're right. Putting them on your tzitzis, you can't fulfill the mitzvah that way. But let's say a person stole raw wool and spun them into strings. Vaso chutim ksherim. You made them into kosher strings. Kaven diyesh kan yeyush v'shinoi ma'isa. So here you have a case of the two ingredients that you need for the gezel to transfer ownership to the gazlan. you have Yeush, presumably, and Shinoi Maisa, you've changed the form of the raw wool that you stole, right? So then the strings are kosher strings, and they're not considered stolen property anymore, but there's a debt that the Goslin owes to the owner of the wool. So therefore the strings are kosher. However, the Rama agrees that if you know that they're stolen, lichatchila, you're not allowed to put them on a beged because it's a mitzvah ba'avera. At the end of the day, it's a mitzvah that was able to be fulfilled through the performance of an avera, and therefore it taints the mitzvah. And if you did, you've only found out after the fact that this tzitzis was made from a stolen raw wool and then spun into strings, and then it was put on your beged, and you bought the beged with the strings, then you can't make a bracha on it. The tzitzis is kosher, you can wear it, but you can't make a bracha on it because you have to say that God sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us because it all came to you through theft.
As soon as we pay back the original owner, did we do a bracha at that point?
I don't think so. I think that the stigma of stolen wool always remains on these strings because I think it was the only way that you fulfilled the mitzvah was through the performance of an avera.
Is it a bracha l'matala?
That's a good question. What if you did make a
But you'll
bracha?
make the bracha anyway. So it's just all it's done.
Okay, so let's say
You're not gonna
it's
bracha, just put it
let's
on.
okay, but let's say that this was
Right.
no, we don't. You're right. We don't make a bracha on our talis katan. Okay, so change the scenario. Let's say you bought a talis, and the
Okay, so it's on
talis,
the talis.
yeah.
That wasn't the question.
Okay, well, tzitzis could be anything. Okay. Okay. So he goes through a whole bunch of different things as far as what's considered.
So the same would be for anything that was like.
I find the question like strange to ask in the first place. If it's stolen, the whole thing should go on in the first place.
Right, but a lot of times you're dealing with a b'diavad situation where you only discover that they were stolen after after the fact,
So, River, what's this? I was just thinking of another similar thing with somebody who blows shofar, but it's a stolen shofar.
Mhm.
You're not yotzi hearing the shofar because it was stolen, or you are yotzi hearing the shofar, but he's not yotzi for blowing.
So with a shofar, you don't have shinoi maisa. There's been no inherent change in the horn, unless the guy stole a goat,
A ram's
a guy
Stole the animal, they took it out himself.
a guy stole a ram, shechted it, ate it, and then used the horn as a shofar, right? So that's also a mitzvah ba'avera. It could be your yotze the mitzvah because there's shinoi maisa there.
So if you didn't know your yokes in the mitzvah, but if you do know that there's something, there's a Choshen that something went on, then it's
Yeah,
a question.
right. And also there has to be shinoi maisa. There has to be a change to the stolen item. Okay. Okay, so the she'ela here is really seeking the rationale of what we saw before is called takanas hashavim, the remedy for people who want to do tshuva. And what is that? Remember, we learned about this before. A guy steals a long beam, expensive beam of wood. As he's building his house, he installs it as the central beam for his roof. And we discover now that it's stolen. The basin comes after him. Yeah, so he says, I want the beam out. So he's going to have to completely dismantle the roof at huge expense in order to return the beam. So the Chachamim said we make a remedy for that person, and instead of making him take out the beam, we just make him pay for the value of the beam. Even though normally, as long as there was no inherent change to the beam, he would be chayev to return the beam. So here, right, and remember we said that's the difference between chattel and real estate. With real estate, we don't make the accommodation of takonas hashavim, but with stolen chattel, we make the accommodation that we do not make a person go to great expense to return the stolen item. So this siman, he's going to deal with the reasoning behind it. Mahatam sha'amru chacham misha gazal kora ubana abidiraso uba lasos tshuva afal pishol nishtanis tzuras hakora. He says, why is it that the Chachamim made this accommodation? That if a person stole a beam and put it in his house, even though the beam is still intact, the rabbis did not require the guy to demolish a portion of his structure in order to take out the beam and return it to the owner. But rather, you just have to give the value of the beam, and you fulfill your obligation that way. So what's the reason that the rabbis did this? So the tshuva is, midin Torah, afilu gazal kora ubana bebinyan, hol velo nishtanes eno kora ba'atzma, hayetzarech lahara, lo nishtanes, it's a typo, osa kora ba'atzma. He says, from the Torah point of view, if a person steals a beam and installs it in a structure and it doesn't change inherently, then he would have to really dismantle the entire structure if necessary in order to return that beam. The rabbis made this accommodation as long as the original owner of the beam is not losing his money. That instead of giving him back the original beam, he can just pay him the cash value. V'hatam l'takana zu, she'im atam matzrichu laharos beisu lahachzir hakora atzma yesh chashash shebnei adam yimna'u mila'asos tshuva. The reason is because if we were to require people to go to such great expense to return something that they stole, we're worried that a person might not want to do tshuva and might not want to return the item. Is this not worth it for me to do tshuva and become an honest man? V'lochein amru chachamim yesh lahashiv estimei hakora leba'olim v'yotzei bazeh yidei chovas hashava. And therefore the chachamim said, you should just instead give the value of the beam and you fulfill your obligation. Okay, I mean, it's almost like anyone who's committed fraud, sometimes the government will work with them, or the stolen party will work with them if they know that the guy can't return the whole thing. They'll say, and this is a similar thing. Except here, the rabbis didn't give a break to the Gazlan to have him pay less than the value. They just don't require him to give back the original item, just pay the cash equivalent.
What's the knas? What's the penalty?
There is no penalty. There is no penalty.
So
It gives us it's okay, as long as you do tshuva.
but so if cash or the same product back again, would that suffice? For instance, I mean, if the person who's went and bought a beam exactly the same as what they had in the house, but not like for the timber yard and said, here we are, get this back to you. What's the difference?
It might make a difference. First of all, the halacha requires you to return the item you stole, not just, the ganef doesn't have the option of deciding whether he wants to give back the item or pay cash. That leverage is not his.
So
the Torah says he has to return the item he stole. There's a special accommodation that the rabbis made, which is not in the Torah, but they may be accommodation out of a concern that people are not going to want to do the right thing.
But only return cash, not a similar item.
It has to be cash.
It has
to be cash, unless the guy is okay with you giving him a beam instead. Yeah, but it's the choice. It's the option of the offended party. Yeah.
All right, So you don't want to give an incentive for a husband to continue, these deadlines. So to speak.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? There doesn't appear to be, as Bruce said, there's no.
Yeah,
cost,
there's no, so the Torah does give a knas for Geneva versus Gazela. For Geneva, you have to pay back kefil, you have to pay double. However, we don't practice that anymore. We don't practice. So really, there really is no disincentive for a person to steal. And why is that? Because, and certainly for Gezel, where you do it blatantly without hiding, there's no kefil, there's no double penalty. So why is that? And I believe I may have either seen this somewhere or this is my own idea, I don't remember, is that people know how bad stealing is. You become a pariah and people will ostracize you if they know that you've stolen. So the Torah doesn't need to provide that much of a disincentive from stealing because society recognizes the wrongness of it, but you have to make things right. You have to right the wrong that you did. But more than that, there was no requirement. Now, with that said, if a person is a habitual thief or a habitual ganav, then the Sanhedrin, the Beis Din at their discretion could choose to either put you in cherem, ostracize you, make you pay a penalty, but generally speaking, penalties are not imposed. One of the options that they could always have at their disposal is to turn you over to the secular authorities and say, this guy, we don't want to handle this guy anymore. He's a member of our community, but the Beis Din might give the aggrieved party the right to get the police involved and to have him thrown into jail.
But today, levels of fear. There's almost at some point, there's some lower levels, it's point of acceptance. So people from an office, you take a pen, take something, a paper, whatever it is, and you take it home and you don't return it. I mean, in effect, you've stolen from the company.
Well, it depends.
And that's sort of, it's sort of accepted today.
Well, it all depends on what the level of acceptance is, you know. If the company says we don't mind, no, we don't mind if you take, you have to know explicitly from the company you're working for. The only time I'll take pens and paper from the office here is because I know I'm going to be using it for shul business when I get to my home office. Right, that's why I have a small stack of shul stationery because I print things in my office, and you know, and so I can rationalize printing personal items here because I print much more on my personal printer for the shul than I do the other way around. But if you know that if you have to ask the employer first, it's not there's no such thing as, well, everyone else is doing it, so I can do it too. But you have to know that the office doesn't mind.
So kefil was not imposed since when did that stop?
Kefil seems to have stopped in the post-Talmudic era. I don't know exactly the year, but in the times of the Rishonim, they sort of said we're no longer collecting knas anymore.
So you can say that by any of them. You murder someone, well, you can.
No, well, the Sanhedrin is no longer convenes for violent crimes. So those have to be turned over to the secular authorities.
Now you mentioned about turning it over to the secular, another interesting topic, how far you can go by turning over people to secular law.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, technically, if you know someone steals from you and you confront them, and the guy says, okay, just give me 30 days to return it to you, the question now becomes, do you have a right to call the police and get them in trouble? So really the question is, if he's willing to make good on everything that he's done, then really halachically you should give him the opportunity to make good on what he's stolen and not report him to the authorities. However, there may be instances where he's done this before, and the only way to control him, sometimes you have to eyeball it. You have to make your own call.
That's the same thing by going to to a court of law as opposed to going to a different.
No, you don't really have, I mean, people are a little bit too liberal in going to secular court before taking another from Jude to Beis Din. So I'm not prepared to say that. But
line that's crossed, someone doesn't respond, if someone doesn't.
yeah, if someone is sent a hazmana and they fail to respond, usually the Beis Din will give you the nod. Yeah, they'll give you permission to go take it to secular authorities. But to go to the secular court directly without trying to resolve it in Beis Din first is a no-no. And I know lots of frum people do it, but yeah, it's not really permitted. Okay.
You know, the basin is always going to not necessarily go in the right way. If your approach at the basin is not 100%.
Well, there may be various different concerns. One is that you live in a community which is where people are tied up with the rabbis of the Beis Din in different ways. So then but that doesn't exempt you from going to Beis Din. You just have to choose an unbiased Beis Din, and perhaps even taking it to another
Can
city.
you do that? Is something that takes place, let's say you're in the city, go to Montreal or go to New York and take the person.
If the guy's willing to do it, yeah. If he's not, then under certain circumstances, you can take him to secular.
Guys that really stole from you, whatever reason, and gives tons of stuff in the city, you know how it works, and then
Right.
you're not gonna get it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a difficult situation. I don't think that I don't think anyone, the letter of the law would say, oh, you got to take him to the local Beis Din. But the guy's influence in the city among the Rabbanim who sit on the Beis Din is clearly is obvious. It's glaringly obvious.
But if you ask someone to go to a different Beis Din outside of their city, then aren't you responsible for, like, have to discuss costs and everything else?
No, you wouldn't be responsible if you accuse that party of being liable to pay you money, if there's no other alternative. Because you say, listen, I can either take you to Beis Din in Montreal at your expense, or I'll just sue you in secular court if the guy refuses. Okay. So va'afilu im gazal kora v'yasa litzarach sukaso shehidira sarai. Let's say a guy steals a beam and puts it in his sukkah. You could say, well, a sukkah is a temporary structure. Uba balakor letova b'toch hachag, no se lo dameha. So if the guy who was the stolen party comes to you during sukkahs, you could say, look, I need my sukkah for the rest of sukkahs. If you want restitution now, I'll give you cash. And that's within the right of the ganav to do. Kevin shekol yemei hachag nechshav chediras keva. Since, during the days of the chag, that's considered to be a permanent structure. Aval im tovei sheyachselo asakar la'achar hachag. But if he says, you know what, I'm willing to wait until after the chag, I want my beam back. Kevin shelo nishtanes v'lo b'na'a betit ve'in lo hefsid im yasteris binyan sukaso, yesh lo lahachziris akora atzma. So therefore, if he says, I'm willing to wait until after Sukkot, since there's no financial loss to the ganaf to dismantle the sukkah that he had to dismantle anyway, then he actually has to return the original beam.
We're assuming that, unlike the shitz stole, hustle the tzitzis, the quiver that's stolen doesn't hustle the sukkah, seems that is assumption that it's kosher.
That's an interesting point. So why doesn't it passel the sukkah? Yeah. So let's take a look at that tomorrow. He may have something here for us to look at.
I'd only be a certain portion.
Okay. Okay. Hold it.